I think, if I recall correctly, our mission today was to look at the new bill drafts that were sort of incorporating everybody's thoughts and see what we wanted to do. If we want to bring those on up to Revenue Interim Committee with our legislative members, or what we wanted to do. So if Bryce is on, and I suspect he is, we'll let Bryce walk everybody through the program, unless anybody has any questions. And I really want to thank everybody for going out of their way again to help us out with this project. So if there's no questions, I don't know, because if somebody raises their hand, Bill, you're going to have to tell me.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As Brent said, our kind of last items of business are just to finalize the 3 drafts that are actually in bill draft form now. Thanks to Megan Moore for helping us get those final 3 recommendations put together for approval. Shouldn't have changed any from what we've discussed in the prior meeting. She just went through the official process, made sure that all the statute references were cleaned up appropriately and put it into their format. So I can share those and we can go through those quickly and just get final approval. The only thing that is really left probably for debate is just applicability dates or effective dates on those. Outside of that, I think they should be finalized, and then we'll get back into the big one, which is incorporated the changes from the last meeting. And then the really last outstanding piece is just coming up with what we want to put for those income threshold changes into that draft. So let's start with the 1 acre home site at market value. Are you all able to see that? Okay, so from our last meeting, again, this is just the change that we discussed where we would move the 1 acre home site on qualified ag land to market value, with the first portion of that market value exempt according to the statewide average market value of all 1 acre farm sites on qualified agricultural land. So again, I think from our last meeting, based on this cycle's values, that average came in around $57,000. So the vast majority of those 1 acre farm sites for qualified agricultural property would end up being exempt. They would actually see a decrease in taxes compared to what that 1 acre farm site is currently. And it would just serve to kind of close those equity gaps in places like Gallatin County or Flathead County along the lake, where you have those really high valued lots that a portion of it would be exempt, but that statewide average isn't going to come anywhere close to where those market values will end up being when that change is made. So that's really all this draft is doing, is in 15.6.134, which deals with the class 4 property. It's just clarifying again that that 1 acre site is at market value, and that the portion of that value is exempt equal to the statewide average value of a 1 acre home site on agricultural property. Any issues, concerns anyone has with this draft?
Just by observation, it looks like there must be a little bit of it on a page 2.
Sure. So this is the main change. Page 2 is just kind of.
There's the end of the sentence I was wondering about. Yeah.
So again, seems like there was consensus from the last meeting. If we just get verification that that's still the case, we will consider this one as approved by the committee as a recommendation that I'll present to the Revenue Interim Committee next Monday for consideration as a revenue.
This is Bob Story. I just think we need to clarify what 1 acre is about. Why is it 1 acre and not half an acre or some other number? It's always kind of been a standard number, and I think it has to do with kind of well and septic system regulations, but I don't know that for sure. And so I don't know if, I mean, if 1 acre's what the justification for using that size of parcel is.
That was, Bob, that was there before. And so recently, and I don't know what the justification for why it was there before is. So all this bill is doing is just changing that, the valuation of that acre, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the bill, I don't think the bill should have a clarification of why it's an acre, should it? And that's a
No,
question for
I'm
everybody.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that someone needs to, as always, if someone challenges that and says, why not a half an acre? Because I can get my well and septic and my house on half an acre. Why am I paying full market on a full acre? A lot in town isn't an acre, but
Gotcha.
I think that's what it is on. So if you have a 20-acre tract, 21-acre tract, the non-quals and stuff like that is 1 acre. So
Yeah, we've always had a 1 acre site, and I can tell you from our valuation standpoint, there isn't a significant difference if we change that from 1 acre to half acre, just with how our models work with primary and then residual value. Dropping that to from 1 acre to half acre from a valuation standpoint really wouldn't have a significant difference.
Mr. Chair, we
This
do
is-
have one question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Thane.
Thank you. Bryce, first, my apologies because I was out of the country and missed the last meeting. But as you contemplate this change, did the committee discuss what kind of testimony we might anticipate at a bill hearing and whether or not there would be anticipation of any kind of pushback with regard to this change? Your initial comment was that it would probably be to the benefit of most, but just curious to know if there's anything out there that we need to be aware of.
Sure. So as you might recall from the meetings before the last one, the discussion around the 1 acre home site moving the market value seemed to be pretty
Right.
popular. That would have increased taxes on all of those qualified ag properties with the 1 acre farm site. So in anticipation of potential pushback, that's where this exemption portion came into play, where the concept of exempting that portion of market value up to the statewide average value of all 1 acre sites. I think, if I remember right, that eliminated the taxes on the home at 1 acre site on around 23,000 to the 26,000 home sites. So that exempt piece was put in specifically to address the concern that you're talking about and the potential pushback.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions on this particular draft concept? Again, the only thing that Megan had initially put in here is an applicability date of tax years beginning after January 1, 2025. We might just propose to make that effective after tax year 2026, just because typically we don't make big significant value changes mid-cycle, and that would be mid-cycle. So I think probably from a department standpoint, we probably prefer that if that just change aligned with the next reappraisal cycle. So beginning after tax year December 31st, 2026. So effective for tax year 2027, I think would probably be the recommendation from the department as far as an applicability date.
And I agree with that for all those reasons, as well as the surprise reason. Making it feel like it's retroactive doesn't help.
Scott,
Chair, we have one question, Mr. Mendenhall.
Go
Hello
ahead,
there.
Scott.
I guess I just wanted to make sure that, to Representative Thane's question, make no mistake, the people along Flathead Lake that are will be affected by this and other similarly situated properties around the state. I don't know how many of those would show up, but those are the people that will be impacted by this. I think that's self-evident, but don't want to, in my opinion, I don't want to have the assumption that there's not going to be any opposition.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell has a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
Maybe more of a statement, but to address Scott as well, but I know there'll be some people negatively impacted, but they're the ones that have been taking advantage of this giant loophole to begin with. But I just for example, I was at the vet today and talked to a random person. They all know that I'm in the cherry business, and she just brought up on her own just this blatant fraud that's going on around here with the little cherry orchards. And she's a lakefront owner herself, and there's so many people that are so disgusted by it. So I think there'd be more positive results in my area than negative.
Okay, if no one has any other concerns with this draft, we will move forward, presenting it for consideration as a committee bill next Monday, and just with the proposed change of the applicability date for tax year 2027. Okay, next one should be pretty quick and easy. This is the RTC change. Again, based on talk from the last meeting, we set the idle land classification at the 640 acres. So anything below that 640 acres that doesn't qualify as agricultural would be considered class 4 tract land, either residential or commercial. We would need some larger sales data in order to properly market model those size properties. So again, all of this draft does is change the exclusion on the RTC for agricultural and timber properties to include that 640 acre threshold.
Chuck has a question. Go ahead, Chuck.
Thank you. Yeah, so this seems pretty necessary to the department if the bill on the larger parcels passes. Should this be a separate bill request, or should it just be integrated into that bill?
That's a legitimate question, and that question maybe we should pose to a few experts that are on this committee, better known as our legislators and former legislator. Or Bob. That's a former legislator. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I think you could do it one of two ways. You could certainly incorporate in that bill, and if that one went down, you'd be done with it, or else you put a contingent voidness on it or something, so tie it to the other bill. So if the other bill fails, this bill fails also. But I think, it might be better to incorporate it with the other bill and not have it out there standing alone.
So as I understand that, you agree with Chuck that why not put these together then?
Yeah, I mean, if this one were to pass and the other one didn't, why would we want to require this information be gathered at all,
Right. Does everybody kind of agree with that? Anybody disagree with that?
Sounds good to incorporate them.
I agree.
So everybody's okay with the language in this, and then administratively, when we put this stuff together to take to the senator and representative at Rick, we'll put it together as a bill.
Okay, and I think we can probably do this in a draft to make this piece applicable earlier than the rest of that bill draft would be, because we would need to start collecting these sales a lot sooner than when we would be making that change, but I think we can piecemeal different applicability dates to different sections within the bill draft. So I don't think that should be an issue either.
Chuck, is your hand up again or still?
I'll take it down.
Oh, okay. Just making sure you didn't have another question.
Okay, we will move forward and just incorporate this with the bigger bill. This one standalone did have an applicability date of October 1 of 2025. I think that's probably acceptable. No, that would give everyone a little notification before the change went in place, but still get it in place relatively soon so that we can start collecting the data we need to build those models. If no one has an issue with that, remaining is the applicability date for this particular section.
Good to hear.
Okay.
Oh, there's Bob. Bob, do you have a question?
Yeah, the Bryce's comment about you need some lead time. So how much data are you going to have to gather to have something you can use to set a market value on these large parcels anyway? It's going to be a year, 2 years. You have a sense of that? I mean, it has more relation to the other bill of how it goes about, you know,
It's just the home side.
how in the interim you would set a value on those properties, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's largely dependent on how many sales we get of those 640 acre parcels to 25 acres, which is kind of what we collect now for sales price data is about 25 acres or below. So it really depends just on the number of sales we get as to how quickly that would happen. I mean, we could certainly build models using our sales that we collect now to try to calculate appropriate market value on these larger parcels. It's just the more large tract sales we get, the more accurate our models will be.
And it's gonna be somewhat regional anyway, I suppose, you know. I mean, I doubt if you'll be down to the neighborhood like you are with residential, but you might be you know, several counties together that are pretty comparable.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do already with some of the rural eastern Montana along the High Line as we group counties already for our models. So that wouldn't change. We would still be looking at combining those areas that are similarly situated when building these models. So that wouldn't be any different than our current practice.
Thank you.
Okay, the next draft, I think consensus on this one really didn't even change a whole lot from what was presented before, is just to eliminate non-qual. Again, really the only debate left is an applicability or effective date for this draft as well. Given just the assumption from the workload and administration piece, we would anticipate a large number of these people would probably submit an actual application for agricultural classification once they lose their non-qual status. So it's just kind of a question of our workload and when we think we can do that without putting a large fiscal impact on there. So I would think probably by the 2027 reappraisal would be pretty tight time frame if this didn't pass until, you know, late spring of 2025. That would give us a year and a half to process applications to make that change. So that's really the question, is the 2027 reappraisal or the 2029 reappraisal.
Bryce?
Yes.
So Bob Story and I were just on the Property Tax Working Group Local Government Subcommittee Zoom meeting, and we listened to a young man from Utah tell us that the land in Utah is taxed as either agriculture or market. I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I think Montana's the only state that probably has this weird non-qual classification currently. I don't know if the others and the research we did that had a sub-classification like we currently do with non-qual, or like we're proposing to still have to some extent the idle land classification.
Nope, nobody else.
Mr. Chair, we have one question from Mr. Thane.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. So Bryce, did you do an estimate of the impact on FTE in the department to make this transition? And are your thoughts predicated on the idea that you would do it with existing staff, or would there be a necessity for additional staff as you make this transition?
I know we did some analysis when we were proposing this draft in the prior session, or trying to find someone to carry this bill for the 2023 session. There would be some additional FTE to administer it. It's just if we spread it out, our approach back then was to kind of take a more staggered approach and break out those 40,000 potential applicants over a number of years to keep that cost down. So again, I think it's a question of if we were to try to implement this by the 2027 reappraisal, that cost would be probably higher than if we were to try to implement it by the 2029 reappraisal, where we could spread that work over a greater number of years and potentially need less FTE than if we were to try to, stand it up and process everything within a year and a half.
So just to follow up, if in fact there was a 2029 applicability, do you think that landowners would then not feel a sense of urgency to get their applications in, and you might still end up with a rush of applications late in the cycle?
I'm sure that would happen. I know with a lot of our other filings, human nature is to procrastinate and wait till the last minute. And so I'm sure to some extent we would see that happen. It's just if we either through administrative rule could somehow force their hand into that step. And that's kind of, I think, the approach we were looking at for that 2023 draft is with that staggered approach, make it required that different owners apply by different deadlines that, try to alleviate that concern of everyone just waiting until, December of 2028 to get their application in. With the staggered approach, we would send notification that, this change is occurring, that they would have to apply if they want classification as qualified ag, and give those different people different deadlines to kind of ensure that that work is staggered over a number of years.
Thank you. And then just by way of follow-up, again, have you wrestled with what the application would look like and how labor intensive it would be on the part of the property owner?
So yeah, I mean, the application would just be the current application for ag classification. So it wouldn't be a new application other than what other changes we would potentially incorporate with the proposed draft of eliminating the automatic. But from that sense, it's just our current application. We have a pretty good idea of how long it takes us to process those applications currently. So yeah, I would say we have a pretty good handle on that process.
Thank you.
Mr. Story has a question.
Go ahead, Bob.
Bryce, wasn't there some discussion or thought that if the first bill passes and everything, the acre goes to market value, that may, a lot of these non-qual people may just never apply anyway, right? Because I think there's some synergy between the two bills. If you're, gonna pay full value on the acre under your house, would non-qual make any difference for a lot of people? I wonder.
I think that would have been the case if we were valuing that 1 acre at market value, and that was it. But when we put that exemption clause in there, I think again, it significantly benefits people to go through that process of getting that ag classification, because again, the majority of them would see that 1 acre site end up being exempt. So if it weren't for that exemption clause, I would think you would probably be accurate in that statement, but since we put that provision in there, it would still behoove people and benefit them to get classified as ag classification, because the large majority of them would see all or a majority of that 1 acre site exempted. So I guess that's my thoughts or comments there.
Thanks.
Not seeing any other questions.
And I
So
guess.
go ahead, Bryce.
I guess if everyone's just okay with this, the concept of eliminating non-qual, we can probably discuss further internally our anticipated workload with that and set in applicability or effective date accordingly if no one has a preference otherwise.
Seeing nothing, should we call this one good? Everybody's good taking this to revenue interim? Whoop, I think Cindy, you're raising your hand.
Yeah. I was just wondering, and maybe this is a question I'm not allowed to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. For the legislators in the room, how many of our legislators are going to be impacted by these bills?
Well, I would just suggest that in virtually every legislative district, there will be some impact. Certainly, it'll be more significant in certain parts of the state than in others. But yeah, I would say in total, everybody will be impacted. We'll hear from constituents.
Okay, thanks.
And that's why I'm thinking that by the time it does get to committee hearing phase, that we're going to need to coordinate on quite a high level to get as many proponents or supporters of what we're trying to do here. And even from those ag production entities who can come in and at least say that it really doesn't affect them much either way. So it's just working toward modernization of our tax code here in the state of Montana.
I agree.
We'll be ready for them because they will come.
Okay, sounds like that one is good to go as well. So now the big one that still has some work to be done and some decisions to be made is just the eliminate automatic qualification based on size. So I tried to incorporate the changes that we had talked about in the last meeting. So again, other than the commercial purposes definition, we moved all those other exclusions to what's considered bona fide ag out of the general definition, so they didn't have any broader impacts than what we intended into the just 15.7.202. It deals specifically with property classification. So that was really the only change from that perspective. The one question that is changing then is on our idle land classification for those 640 acre parcels and above that don't qualify as agricultural. You remember from the last meeting, it was 640 acres was the threshold. You were going to use the grazing value that we currently use for non-qual and then apply that 20 times multiplier. Everyone's still good with that concept? Is idle land the correct name to call it.
Is this document on the website, Bryce?
This one is not on the website because it's not finalized, and we didn't want to put a bunch of these drafts out there that are subject to change. So the
Okay.
three we were pretty much finalized with are on the website. This one, I think Bill sent it to the members
Yep.
of the committee, but it hasn't been made publicly available yet.
So Chuck had his hand up, and we'll have him go, and then Lieutenant Governor Juris is on. Go ahead, Chuck.
Thank you. Bryce, could you give us an idea of the difference in amount of tax paid with that 20x multiplier, say on a section of land? Are we going from $100 to $2,000, or is it for grazing land, is it a bigger jump than that?
So you remember we kind of had this spreadsheet put together last time. So again, here's the current non-qual value per acre, current tax rate, the multiplier, the 640 acre size limit, and what the taxes would be assuming 500 mils. So if it was this idle land classification at 500 mils, they would be paying $7,614.26. And if it was classified as agricultural at that statewide average grazing rate, the taxes would be $380.71. So a pretty significant change there. Again, this would vary depending where you're at on the state and what the mills were. You know, mills range anywhere from probably 320, 340, all the way up to 1,000 or over. So that is the variable that would change depending on where the property is located within the state. But that at least gives you an idea. Lieutenant Governor.
I'm just wondering if maybe we might add a definition of idle land. Some people may argue, well, my land isn't idle, even though it may not meet your agricultural standards. I'm using it for bird watching. I'm using it, and that's not idle. I'm using it so I'm wondering if we would benefit from adding a definition of what we mean by idle land. Really is land that doesn't, of that size, that doesn't qualify for agricultural purposes and isn't otherwise and isn't used, I guess, for commercial.
So I did put this in 15.7.202 for the
Okay.
purpose. This section, idle land means parcels of land of 640 acres or more under one ownership that did not apply for or is not eligible for valuation assessment and taxes.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. I think that totally addresses my concerns. Thanks.
Okay. Marcus.
Yeah, I've beaten this dead horse, but I'm going to take one more swing at it just so that since this is the last meeting, I still have a lot of concerns with this idle land classification that we're trying to create here. I think it's going to create a lot more problems and a lot more opposition to this overall package that we're trying to put together. I know that folks have concerns, and I just think that we're creating a bigger issue with this. But I've said that before. I just wanted to say it one more time. I'm thinking about, there's this habitat leasing program that FWP's got going. So let's say that somebody takes their land out of grazing for 2 years and enters into this this habitat lease. Now that land is primarily earning money from conservation. Is that land no longer going to be classified as agriculture? There's just a ton of scenarios that I can see popping up like this where, we seem to think that idle land is bad, and I'm not sure that it is. I think forcing people to make a decision about whether or not they can keep land or if they have to sell it off to somebody that can afford to pay for it, that could be more problematic in the long run. We want to incentivize agriculture. I 100% think that's right, but I think that forcing people to decide between whether their land should quote unquote sit idle or try to find some way to make it pencil out is really problematic. I know I've said this all before. I'm just getting this off my chest before we get to the end of this, and this seemed like a good point to do it. So take that for what it's worth. Just taking one more swing at that dead horse that I've beaten probably more than it needs to be at this point. So thanks for hearing me out.
So Marcus, everybody's listening, and I think everybody might, let me speak for myself. I hear what you're saying. And I can't say that I would disagree with anything you said about the things that are going to come up. However, what do we do? Do you have a suggestion as to how we would deal with these parcels, these sub 640 acre parcels that are not ag land, but are taxed with the ag land preferential treatment? Is there do you have a thought, an alternative to how we solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously what we've been trying to wrestle with here, right, for the last several months. And I don't, other than calling them idle lands and saying that they no longer get to be considered agriculture, I mean, that there hasn't been a better idea put forward. I go back to something I asked earlier is, can we quantify these lands that people, quote unquote, are coming in, buying them up and taking them out of ag? Can we quantify that? I don't have a good sense that we know how much land is being taken out of agricultural production and just being left idle. And I don't, Director, and that's why I haven't made a big, fuss about this other than to just say that I've got some concerns, and I'm sure other people will have concerns as this moves forward. But I just wanted to raise this again. I think until we have a real firm handle and we can say, X number of acres have been taken out of agricultural production or just sitting idle, a big change like this, I think is going to be hard for a lot of people to swallow. So that's all I've got. I don't have a solution. I wish I did. I've just got more problems to throw in your lap. Sorry for that.
Not at all. That's what this committee's for, Marcus, and appreciate it very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I'm not saying this to try to hold us up. I just want to air my concern. So that's all.
So Lieutenant Governor was up, and then Bob, and then Ross. Go ahead, LG.
Marcus, just to address the use of habitat dollars, at least under this, generally grazing is not inconsistent with habitat. So I still think there's a lot of land that will be in agricultural production, grazing more than tillable sorts of acreage, that the habitat dollars will be going after. Just wanted to comment on that.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think Marcus raised some good points, politically, that there's going to be some, just like every concept when it comes out, we've been kind of talking to each other and we don't have all the answers. We better understand that. And when this concept hits public discussion more, there'll be some things come up that say, why didn't we think to that, and maybe that can be fixed, or maybe it generates a whole nother 2 years of working on the concept to move it a little farther down the road. But it just dawned on me, though, that, in my part of the world, the biggest thing taking ag land out of production is development, residential property and commercial development stuff. And sometimes that land sets as a weed patch for, 20, 40, 60, 80 acres as a weed patch for a long time. And I don't know how the department's dealing with that, if they're kicking it over into class 4 property at that point in time, or if they're, if it's still agricultural land, and of course it wouldn't fall into this bill because it's less than 640 acres. Now, if anybody could hear me, because my computer says something about Arabic here, so
Mine did the same, Bob. I was wondering if you and I must be speaking the same language. But
We can hear you, Bob.
all right, that's all I had to say.
thank you, Bob. Again, well said. Ross?
Okay, two things, and I think Bob touched on it. Director, you said something about sub 640, but this bill's 640 and over. And my understanding is the theory behind this idle land of more than 640 acres is kind of the idea of giving some sort of a deferential treatment to it in the 20 times ag rate kind of deal instead of full market value, because it does have the a bigger opportunity. It could go back into ag use, and we wanted to give some sort of a incentive not to subdivide it and develop it. But I think everything under 640, my understanding is, goes right into tract land. It's rated as a class 4, and in my view, as it should be. The whole idea of the idle land and that discussion, because I don't think Marcus is wrong. I mean, it's going to be a conversation piece, because there's a lot of people that think that bird watching qualifies, and I don't mean that. I don't mean to be snide about that. I mean, but the idea of you're doing something besides producing on it has an equal value. But the concept behind an ag rate is that you're engaged in something that I think as a whole the nation sees as important, which is food and fiber production. And we know that the margins are very slim on that. We've got enough ag people on this committee that we all know that it's not a big moneymaker generally. And it's a nod towards that, saying two things. One, we value production and food and fiber production. And we also recognize that the really large economic positive impacts that ag has in our communities makes up for that reduction in what would maybe be a tax base. But when you set it idle, it no longer is producing that kind of an economic positive outcome to your community. And so it does become more important to support what's going on and the needs of your community in a different tax form, because producing, an economy isn't part of it. So to me, I think that's the argument, but we're going to have to, that discussion is going to have to be had, because I guarantee you there are going to be people coming out and saying that, and I guarantee you there's people that think that conservation is a better use of the land than production. So that's going to be I think that's going to come out there. But on my view, I think the rationale behind why you have an ag rate isn't because you're putting it in conservation. So that's my 2 cents.
I think Chuck was up, and then Senator Beard.
Thank you. I really appreciate Marcus's concerns, and I'm glad that he keeps reminding us that there are going to be edge cases out there, and there are going to be problems with this bill that we never thought of in our discussions. But I think back to our very first meeting, when one of the first exercises we did was have a discussion about, is there a problem out there that needs solving? That we need to try to address. So I think we should proceed with something. This is where the legislative process starts. Whatever the legislature ends up doing on this issue, if they can come to a solution, it's not going to be the draft that we give them. So to keep the conversation going, to invite those people that are going to have a problem with the policy that we've got here, to invite them into the process and have them outline their concerns, I think is important. But I'd like to see us proceed on this.
Thank you, Chuck. Senator?
Thank you, Director Beatty. I think that everything that everyone has said along the way is extremely relevant, and I appreciate Marcus's comments wholeheartedly, because those are exactly the type of comments that are going to be coming at us fast and furious in the legislative session, if not even at the interim committee meeting. We do need to move forward. We do need to show that our emphasis is on this ag economy in the state of Montana, And if we don't do something now, we'll just keep kicking this can down the road. So I think this is a valiant effort for which we need to go forward, and we will be counting on everyone to debate it during the legislative process, so we can hopefully come up with something, maybe even having to be amended to make it more palatable and strengthen what we're trying to get across here in our state. So thank you.
Thanks, Senator. And I think Chuck's up again. Maybe.
Nope. Sorry.
Nope. That's okay.
I lowered my hand.
Gotcha. So, and by the way, Ross, I have no idea why I used the word sub 600 since I was looking right at that definition when I said it. With that, does anybody have additional concerns, things we need to work on, things we need to change on this, or should we proceed forward to revenue interim with this?
Well, I think the couple things we still need to debate that we haven't finalized is the income threshold, and what that should be. I mean, that was kind of the main outstanding thing that we needed to kind of try to finalize today, is what that income threshold should change to, if it should change at all, and a scaling factor to account for the larger operations to ensure that they're actually, not just meeting that minimum on, 20 acres, they're 10,000 acres.
So we had some stuff developed to present, did we not, on that?
A little. Again, we've met with TPR. The difficulty we have is we just don't have the back end data to show any of the impact of whatever number we chose. So any number we throw out there is just a shot in the dark. Because we don't have, with the automatic qualification currently for everything under 160 acres, we just don't have the data to know what any of these changes or proposed changes would actually have as an impact to property owners. So we discussed at the last meeting just the $4,000 and then the $6 per acre for every acre in excess of 640. And then the real question is, do we want to make that change? And if we do want to make that change, do we want to make that change for grazing as well, or do we want to leave grazing as is? And again, the real implications here with grazing land is at the statewide average productive value of 0.212 AUMs per acre. Currently, with the $1,500 and the 25 AUM minimum, you have to have 100 and essentially 18 acres to meet that qualification. If we were to move that up to the $4,000, that acreage minimum is now 314 at that statewide average. I did look at the numbers. About 62% of the acreage that's currently classified in grazing, or approximately 20 million acres, is at or below that statewide average productivity of 0.212. So in practicality, you're probably going to need more acreage than even this minimum is indicating if we were to move that threshold.
So, I mean, from my perspective on that, you should probably leave grazing where it's at. Does anybody disagree with that?
I think the other thing that the working group probably needs to consider is that's just that income threshold or minimum is more so based on that. If you meet that, you currently qualify. So if you have 120 acres or you have 80 acres, and our production soil productivity data says that it can support that many AUMs, you automatically get that classification, whether you're actually grazing it or not. So I think the other consideration here is if we keep that minimum in place with the concept that you have to show some sort of ag production, how do how do we quantify that on a grazing parcel and ensure that it's actually being used short of a DOR staff having to go out there every month and make sure that there's actually cattle grazing on that land. I think that would probably be the other thing for the committee to consider and provide some recommendations is, do they just show $1,500 of income and we don't care if it's from the sale of one cow that they had out there for a week? Or how do we put some sort of sideboards on there to, for the taxpayer or property owner, that show that they're actually using it in an agricultural capacity? Because again, currently, if the productivity data says you can support that many AUMs, you get the classification without actually having to, show that you're grazing on that property.
Fundamentally, I don't have a problem with that, because that goes back to one of the fundamental premises I had at the start, which was I don't want Bryce and Robin having to decide who's a real cowboy or not. From subjective standards, right? At least now, and I mean, I can be swayed the other way. The nice thing about this is it's objective. You got it. You're cool. We don't have us or our successors at the Department of Revenue applying some sort of subjectivity to whether or not you're legit. And that's really high on my list of goals, is to not put the department in that position, or anybody in the position having to deal with the department in that respect. Scott, go ahead.
So was wondering about an attestation form that's subject to review or audit.
Yeah, I think we could do that. My other thought is, if you weren't leasing it, maybe if we tied it to your per capita reporting, if you had to show that you were paying some sort of per capita fee, if you weren't leasing that land, to show that you were grazing it to some capacity. Or do we just say it's just like all the others? You show us the $1,500 in income and you get the classification.
I bet the Department of Livestock can stand up as a proponent. This would be a windfall for them. Look at how many guys that have to report 2 cows and a horse.
That was just one of my thoughts as a potential source of information that in theory should be out there and attainable, because that's reported to us. So we could even verify it without the taxpayer necessarily having to provide it, since we collect that reporting on behalf of livestock. So just a thought I had, but again, something discussion.
It's a good thought, for grazing. Again, it's just my philosophy here, and it's just mine. I don't want too many attestations and things subject to audit. If I'm a legislator, I'm going to look a little bit askance at too many things the Department of Revenue wants to audit. And just because the term isn't exactly a friendly term. I don't know what anybody else thinks of that. Do you, as a taxpayer, do we want to fill out more stuff that's subject to audit and all the implications thereof? Are we going to get a line of people that say they don't like that? Got Ross and then Brian and then the senator. Go ahead, Ross.
Okay, I was, the 1 acre valuation of the first acre concept that we're doing, that idea was to help, kind of cover the side of people with small acreages, working on an ag exemption, that somebody was, that we're at least getting taxable value on that portion of it.
Yeah,
Did I misunderstand how that fits in here? I mean, does that, so somebody's got 100 acres and they're grazing it, and we go with the $1,500 sort of rule? Does it make up for it if it's a high dollar area and they're getting a hell of a break on their residential lot by doing the 1 acre actual evaluation?
She did bring,
That's my question.
Who's going to answer that? Bryce?
Yeah, I think to some extent would, again, with that exempt piece coming into play, it is gonna have a much larger impact on those small acreage, probably specialty crops than it is on these, 60 to 100 acres that may or may not be grazing that, I mean, I think there's a lot less of that going on those size parcels than on the smaller specialty crop type parcels. So I think it would to some extent, but I think we're really talking probably these 40 to 100 acre tracts of land, and I don't think you probably see as much there from that 1 acre market value change.
Okay, I mean, I know that there's kind of like, we're trying to address two things. One, large acreages that people have taken out, turned into trophy ranches and quit producing. Then the other side of it is people taking advantage on residential lots, more or less. I mean, or, they're just a house lot, but it's big enough they're getting a break. And we're trying to answer both of those. And this is on that smaller acreage side of it. And I'm just wondering how much of a total break do they get? And, what does that look like? And if you're dealing with something that's truly valued, even though they're utilizing it for, their house is on it and it's a little ranchette kind of thing, but it's not necessarily on Flathead Lake. So the valuation difference between production and per acre market value, I don't know if there's enough differential in there that it drives that use, but I don't know. There again, that's more of a question than an answer.
I think this is Dylan maybe I should have chimed in instead of Bryce. I think the people that you have to keep in mind, kind of like Bryce said, are the people between I'm probably like 80 acres to 160 now. There are people that fall in and out of qualification for agriculture based on the AUMs from cycle to cycle when the AUM numbers change. So, and that's at the $1,500 line. So I think the natural consequence of raising the dollar requirement to 4,000 is there are people who are running cows on lots that are smaller than 160 that will no longer qualify for agriculture. And that's just, and maybe that's okay, but that is what will happen. And so we're just trying to make sure the committee is aware of that.
That's actually what bothers me about this is that collateral damage there. The Mr. Smith, right, would be that guy, or some form of Mr. Smith. Do we have some sort of exception or something like that, or is as soon as you have that exception, do you have the exception that swallows the rule, right? I don't know. Let's see. We had Brian up and then the senator.
Well, I was just going to make the comment that I think this business of trying to figure out what the gross income of a farm should be is pretty much impossible. And also the problem with it is that there's so many ways for a farmer or so-called farmer to get around it. So whether I know, like, to have 331 grazing acres to make the minimum, I mean, that, like you were saying, I mean, that rules out a whole bunch of other possible legitimate farmers, that can't graze that much land and make that kind of money. So, but like in my situation here, people have ways of showing $1,500 worth of income, whether they sold some cherries or not. It's I hate to say it's a joke, but it is. There's so many ways to beat the system that I think in other words, I think we should concentrate on some things that, like we have, that are that are surefire things to help, you know, the inequities. But the minimum amount thing is just not going to get us anywhere. You could, for here, I mean, you can make it 0, or you can make it 5,000. It's not going to change a thing.
Senator?
Unmute. Okay, there I go. So what I was thinking, just as Brian was mentioning, there are too many ways to, find loopholes and get around it. Other than trying to legislate agricultural morality at this point, I'm thinking that a simple attestation to what the usage of this acreage is, and check your box and sign it. And in small fine print underneath that signature block says that based upon your attestation, you will be open to review upon request by the Department of Revenue, and leave it at that, instead of trying to swallow the whole elephant in one fell swoop. I think that we should move on this, get it underway, and then amend it or refine it in future sessions, because I want the ag community to know that we're not making things harder for them on purpose, and then in the PR phase, the hearing phase, to remind everybody that we are trying to be fair. And what is all of this Arabic that keeps popping up? So we need to just remind everybody the reasons that we are doing this, and that we're not trying to be punitive. But if they sign on that dotted line, they are open to being reviewed. Maybe not audited, but reviews can and will occur from time to time. And that's my 2 cents.
John, Roush?
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. My comment is just that if this level has been set at $1,500 for however long it's been, 25 years, a long time. It's the only thing that has allowed it to become such an easy threshold is the natural process of inflation, right? 3 or 4% per year. And now 25 years later, that equivalent is, say, $4,000 or quite a bit more. So it's only the natural passing of time that has actually created the environment in which now making an adjustment of the $1,500 number seems like a punitive or big deal for people to have to meet. But since it was not tied to any kind of index or number from the very beginning, it seems like we have some catching up to do if that number is to mean anything at all, don't we?
I'd mostly agree with you on everything except that AUM. See, because the way those things, that AUM and the dollars tie into each other, almost every other commodity, I think, I would agree with you on. But the way we're set up here, the way that income threshold ties in with your minimum acreage, if we raised the income threshold legitimately with inflation, as you said, suddenly you have to have over a half section to be considered a cowboy.
I do understand that, and I am not disagreeing, and I'm not saying that $4,000 is the number just because that's what inflation has actually done over the amount of time that we're doing, because I agree with you completely that is hard math for some people that would otherwise legitimately qualify. But I guess the question that I have is there any step that we can take now that would prevent some other group of people 25 years from now having to have the same discussion. You know, is there a better way to index this number?
And that's a really valid question. Everything you
And
said, I agree
know,
with.
Yeah, can it be, or could it be stepped? You know, so that it is not a threshold that has to be met all at once.
Well, maybe
I'm
John
just
Lewis
curious,
has
and I think that we probably have already talked about that too. And much like Mr. Strange has apologized 1,000 times about, you know, bringing up the same thing. We probably have covered this ground, but I'm still curious about whether or not there's a better answer than just jumping to a bigger number.
John Lewis, what do you have to say?
Well, I keep changing my mind the more I listen. It just seems like the 168 acre less, or I guess now we're talking 640 acres less. That seems to be our big hang up. And those are the people that are definitely going to be hurting this, are the small acreage guys. I guess my concern is the 640 acre plus, and just to let you know, I'm comfortable with the $6 an acre there. And I don't know if everybody else is too, but $6 an acre for 640 acres plus. It seems like a good number to me. And I don't know the answer for the 640 and below. I wish I did. And like Brian said, people are going to find a way around that if we make it 1,500 or 4,000 or whatever it may be, especially in his neck of the woods, people are going to find their way around that. So I guess I like Senator Beard's comments on, you know, making people attest and show some income, and they're subject to an audit one way or the other, and you just kind of hope that they're honest. That's kind of the only thing I can think. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, John. Let's see, Ross and then Cindy.
All right. Just beating this horse again, I guess. But yeah, I think both Johns have something to say, but I think John Roush about, you know, the discussion was $4,000 came up because that's trying to make up the difference in inflation since it was put in. The other side of that is if you attest to it and there, you know you're subject to review, and it's, you know, doesn't appear that you're actually utilizing it in an ag situation, and we're really just talking about grazing. You know, there's processes to determine what your carrying capacity is if you're 80 acres, and you know it's going to be a little bit of effort. The question is who has to put the effort in. When it came to Mr. Smith, he did the work to demonstrate that his property, you know, should have qualified for a lower AUM number. And I don't know all the work he went through with that, but that would be part of determining if you're trying to get ag rates on, you know, 40 or 80 acres of grazing. You know, that's a different, it can be a bit of a process to do it, but I don't think it's impossible with a number, whether it's, you know, the $1,500 or the $4,000, if your part of your determinants is that you're actually running, you know, a reasonable percentage of what the carrying capacity of your property actually is. So I think you can set up a process to do that review.
Cindy?
Thanks. These are all really great comments. I was just thinking that I got a phone call from my local Department of Revenue, which is really 150 miles away, by the way. But a lot of smaller acreages are part of a contiguous working farm and ranch. And so those should not be difficult at all to incorporate in the annual or the initial redo. And then all of those unattached smaller acreages could or shouldn't be unwilling to attest, as long as it's not an onerous attestation, so long as you don't have to do it like every single year, like there's a reasonable review, no more frequent than the appraisal cycle, and maybe a graduated attestation schedule would be a workable solution. So if you had more land, then you would have to be subject to attestation less frequently. I don't know. It's something to consider.
Anybody else? All right. That being said, so now what? What do we do? Because I'm with the senator on this. If this committee was, and it's an extremely capable committee, we got to put something out there, and we got to put something out there that makes sense, or we're going to put up, you legislators are going to put up with a bunch of other stuff that doesn't make sense. And this is a really good opportunity. How do we do it the best we can? And LG has her hand up.
Well, the problem we're struggling with is depending on what you do with your land, you know, grain versus grazing, it's impossible to set a dollar amount because of the great variety of agricultural production. It's really, really easy to meet for cherries, for example, really hard to meet as we see for grazing. So I think what's fair, if you're really in agricultural production, and you should be entitled to it regardless of your size, but so that leads me, the attestation that we really are seems fairer there, but from enforcing it, that's going to be a lot harder for the department. Another option might be to allow the department to do rulemaking and give you guys the flexibility to determine minimum amounts. Okay, Brendan doesn't want that. This is hard because of the variety of crops. It's just to set a minimum is really hard for grazing, or maybe at least carve out grazing. But now I see when you go to like non-irrigated hayland at 4,000, you need at least 50 acres. Irrigated, and that's what I am. You need 12 on average. This is why it's hard, is the variety of crops and the income generated. It's really hard to set a minimum amount or a minimum amount per acre because of that great divergence in the types of crops or use. And
LG, I think you're right. And the reason I absolutely hate the rulemaking idea is it goes against my very grain of that gives the executive agencies far too much discretion. And I've lived through different ilks of different directors. And I don't think honestly, I don't think it's fair to a taxpayer to have an agency to be able to mess them around in those rules too much, especially with the fluctuation in administrations. The next administration may not like cowboys.
Well, and it's predictability. It's hard to keep up with rates. It would be a big job for you guys. These rates fluctuate. So I guess I'm leaning towards Senator Beard's solution because I just think it's pretty impossible to set a minimum threshold that isn't going to catch up and exclude some smaller acreage owners for some truly agricultural uses of their land. So I lead with the senator.
I'm with you on that too. You know, we're going to get caught, but there will be cheats, and I guess that's why you have the Department of Revenue to find them. And maybe that's the best way to go about it, without having kind of a less than, for lack of a better word, an arbitrary number that decides whether or not you're a farmer or not. Maybe the attestation subject to verification is the way to go. Senator, what do you think?
Well, I thought of one thing that we could do is to add in the language, not only an effective date, but some kind of a benchmark date for review and development of minimum income threshold amounts in the next appraisal cycle, or to have it concurrent with the next appraisal cycle. So that will put us on task to actually come up with some figures to develop a baseline and maybe tie it going forward with income levels and inflationary factors. What do you guys think of that?
Let's see if what John thinks about it.
More of a question, I guess. How often now it's 160 acres, how often do they have to attest? Is that yearly? Or no, just once?
Size. I mean, it's just an automatic qualification if you're that size. So those people don't even have to apply to receive
No,
it.
but I mean the under 160 acre guys now.
Pretty much only if there's an ownership change, we make the new owner attest that and reapply, showing that they're still using the property in an agricultural capacity, or if you have reason to believe that someone's not using it in an agricultural, they wouldn't qualify, we can request that they reapply, but there is no current practice of making people reapply or reattest periodically.
Oh, okay. I was maybe under the assumption they had to apply every year if they were under 160 now.
No, there really is no process other than ownership changes. We require a new application. And then if we have reason to believe something's changed, we can send to reapply, but there's no actual procedure or process that mandates it.
Okay, thank you.
Scott, what do you think?
So another idea to throw on here is that there's an ag committee, and I'm not sure all the things that ag committee does. It's appointed, I think there's terms on that. So that passes through time with good representation of ag. So if there's work, this is getting at John Roush's idea of some kind of a dynamic rather than fix a number. Maybe there could be some process that could be assigned to that ag committee that would allow this to be dynamic through time. And they can look at some of the current market conditions. I'm not sure exactly. I've not been to their meetings. I'd like to, for all kinds of things they do, but that's just another thought that committee sits in statute already. Is there any involvement they may have in this regard is the question I have.
I mean, I guess not currently. They don't evaluate the income component because that's set in statute. They kind of more weigh in on the commodity prices, the period, the number of years we're looking at, recommending like the 10-year Olympic average versus some different time frame. I mean, that's not to say that we could have put something like this under the purview of that committee, but as it stands now, it's not something they've weighed in on just because it is set in statute.
I guess that's my point is if you could tie this to inflation, but that's the reason that the 25 AUMs, if you put inflation on that, it completely is unreasonable. But this committee potentially could be used in some fashion to do a periodic review that would ground truth it with current ag situations.
Go ahead, John Roush.
This is probably the most half-baked idea that you will hear. And I have not, this has just popped into my head. And so I'm going to throw it out there because that's what I do. I am thinking about a bunch of sociological studies and data that exist that say that, for example, here, I'll give you an example, right? If you're in a class situation and the professor asks at the end of the class, at the end of the semester, what grade do you know, here's what I have collected grade-wise. What grade would you give yourself in this class? Invariably, students are, as a group, harder on themselves or wildly generous to themselves. So they're either delusional or they are, they're usually not spot on. They're usually one way or the other. If the first form that you ask any property owner to submit includes an opportunity for them to self-report what they think their income per acre is likely to be, and you use that as a benchmark moving forward to determine whether or not, A, they're being realistic about what they think a farmer is. And then if that meets a threshold that says, yes, we can live with that number, and then you use that number or a percentage of that number moving forward to determine whether or not they're actually making any effort to be a farmer, then you would know whether or not anybody's actually trying to sell enough cherries or sell enough hay or any of that sort of stuff. I don't know whether there's any way to keep track of any of that sort of stuff, but I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, why are we setting the rules? What happens if they set a rule? The likelihood is that they're going to have a better idea of what their numbers should be than we do anyway. So that's my half-baked idea.
Mark?
Thank you. This is not necessarily in response to John. I had my hand up before his comment. But I remember very clearly the director appearing before Revenue Interim Committee last interim and saying that the department is not in a position to deal with ambiguity. And I think anything that we do that doesn't put some hard and fast process or number into proposed legislation is going to create problems for us, because it's not predictable to those people that will be impacted. They don't know what the overall effect will be. And so I think generally they would not be supportive because there's that ambiguity. So I would suggest one of two things. Number one, I agree that I think we need to have a separate standard for grazing. Whether or not we immediately phase into a new number that's been impacted by inflation is a question that's probably better left to the professionals. But I think we should put a hard and fast number in there and then potentially tie to it some process by which that number will change over time. We, in fairness to our constituents, need to be able to allow them the opportunity to look at their own personal situation and react to our proposal on that basis. So I guess predictability on the part of the end user is really important to me.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me too. I wonder if there would be any value to the data that you would generate, even if you just collected what they thought their number would be.
You know, I might react to that thought by simply saying that we could set a standard, but allow them to present some kind of an argument about why that standard may not be appropriate for their particular situation. The problem I see with that, however, is that puts the department again in the position of evaluating that and making a decision, which I think would be difficult in terms of fairness and equity, but also just in terms of the amount of labor it might require in order to impact that. But I would defer to people in the department to respond.
I think you'd hear me agree with you on that, Representative. Bonnie Hamilton has her hand up, and then LG. Go ahead, Bonnie. I think.
You might be muted, Bonnie.
While she's figuring that out, we'll have Lieutenant Governor Juris speak.
Yeah, I appreciate Representative Thane's comments. So I would just throw out for a proposal that we stick with 1,500 for grazing and go up to 4,000 for any other type of agricultural production. I do think you have to carve out the grazing because it's just so unique, and it comprises such a large number of our acreage. It's the most common use. So it's gonna have the biggest impact, adverse impact, if you increase grazing versus others.
So, thank you, LG. Did you have more?
No,
Okay, Bonnie, did you figure out your microphone yet? Apparently not yet. We're gonna let Brian talk. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I was just going to add on to what Lieutenant Governor Juris just said. And because I think we brought this up in the last meeting, maybe I brought that up, and I think it was kind of nixed, because how about if a farm has both grazing and non-grazing? You know, what's their minimum? I guess it would be the higher number, right? So in other words, if I
Sure, why not?
if I had a okay, part of the land was, yeah, obviously just grazing, and so but the other part was irrigated, or other part I had a apple orchard or something. Do you have to have separate minimums that you reach, or do you just, I guess you would just say your whole property has to reach the higher of the two?
Right, per acre, right? Well, I guess the 1,500 isn't per acre, right? Right.
Does that work?
I think so, if I understand it.
Works for me.
Does anybody that knows what they're talking about agree with Brian and me?
yeah, Brian, I think that works. If it's a mixed
agree.
use, you'd have to meet the 4,000.
Okay, sounds good. That makes it pretty clear then.
All right, so let's move back to unless somebody else has something to say, let's move back to our bill draft and try to incorporate. Well, first, let's try to get consensus here. Our $1,500 for grazing, which, obviously ties into that AUM deal, which is what makes it more difficult than the others. Is everybody good with that? Is anybody not good with that? We won't talk bad about you if you say you're not good with it, I promise.
I think it makes defensible sense.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to say we're going to go with the $1,500 deal for grazing. Then we're going to go, is everybody good with the 4,000 for anything else?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Roush has his hand up.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Clearly, I don't know what I'm talking about most of the time, but is there any chance that this disincentivizes people from, in other words, are we creating more people to use grazing as the number at the risk of, encouraging them not to do the other types of production agriculture that they would be doing?
Well, you need over 100 acres for grazing to meet the minimum. So I don't think that's an incentive to put yourself in grazing. It's an incentive to me to put my grazing land into hay.
Right.
Right.
And, generally and you probably know this, but most of the grazing land in Montana is the land that's only really good for grazing. Otherwise, somebody tried to farm it one way or the other.
Yeah,
So
what I don't want to see is people who are using their land that is farmable to take the easy route out, basically, and say, well, we're just going to graze on it because we want the minimums. We just want to meet the minimum.
I guess.
But I don't think it as a real risk either. I just worry about unintended results.
Sure. Bob?
I'm back. I think the $4,000 is low enough that that's not going to be a problem. I mean, most people aren't going to change their whole operation for that. Irrigated ground down here is renting for $125 an acre or more, and so you're gonna hit that $4,000 on a pretty small parcel of land if you're renting it to someone who is farming it. And so yeah, I think there's always that, always some circumstance where that might be, but I do agree with your other point, John, that there's a lot of operations that are multiple use. They have irrigated cropland, they have dryland cropland, they have grazing land. I don't think you want to total the number, so probably your idea of the higher number might be the one that works. I don't,
Cindy.
Would in the situation that John and Bob are both talking about, if you have a mixed use piece of property that's over 640, then you're at the $6 an acre, so it doesn't matter. Would it be difficult for between 1 and 640? Well, say between 160 and 640, is that going to be a problem for anybody? Or do you think, because it's $4,000 is approximately $6 an acre for a 640, right? I'm just trying to think of a situation where, I'm like you, Director, I just don't want to see the small guys hurt. And hopefully at some point, a mechanism for appeal is built into this so that we don't have unintended consequences. That's, I guess, my bottom line. I hope that there's some way for my neighbor to appeal if he's got 80 acres and he is raising cattle on it, but he has to feed them half the year.
So should we stick something in here, an extenuating circumstances or an exception? Now, you don't want to create the exception that swallows the rule, which is what scares you here, right? But fundamentally, I like that idea that there is going to be, I'm thinking out loud, but it feels like there's got to be a catch-all that catches the fish we didn't see in these things. And there's going to be half a dozen of them a day. Would everybody agree that we ought to try to come up in a independent review by the Department of Revenue or for appeal form that makes us decide who's a cowboy, but hopefully it keeps it limited? Bob?
Well, yeah, I agree. Everything needs an appeal process or you have constitutional problems, but again, to Cindy's point, so say you've got 80 acres, what are you going to do with it? Well, if it's not irrigated, you're probably going to graze it. You're not going to have the equipment to farm it. You might rent it out for farming, and I don't know what dryland farm ground rents for in your part of the world, Cindy, but not much, I would guess. I don't know if you could make $4,000 rent on an 80, but
if you include that 80 with part of the rest of your operation, then you're going to be okay.
Yeah,
and that would be an extenuating circumstance.
Well, if I owned 80 and rented it to you because I wasn't gonna buy a combine and a drill and whatever else it takes to raise winter wheat, I guess it's still ag land, right? So I just need to get $4,000 worth of rent out of you on that to make it work. But or else prove that you're getting $4,000 worth of gross income. Maybe that's a question we've skirted around, and how do you deal with rented property? But yeah, so I don't know what your how you deal with the appeals process or how you come in and make that system work if you're can bring in documentation from the farm credit or not farm credit, but farm service agency or from federal crop insurance or somebody like that, or, you know, that's these are the acres and they're in this kind of a crop or whatever, and work it out from there.
That could be one source, but that's not a catch-all for everybody who's involved in agriculture, because so many people who ranch don't participate in FSA programs. And if I wanted to lease your land, your 80 acres to graze it, then we'd have a different, we'd have to have a different mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, I think grazing's easy, right? If you don't have the AUMs, you don't qualify. You know, that's the easy one. It's what happens if it's cropped. It's either going to be irrigated or dry.
Bonnie, did you figure out your microphone and your deal over there yet?
I actually had to go to my phone and call in because my computer decided to just freeze up.
Oh, okay.
So
welcome back, Bonnie.
Thank you. So two things. First off, you're talking about the appeals process, and currently any ag application can go through the informal appeal process and go to a county tax appeal board, etc. if the property owner does not agree with the department's decision on their ag application. So that's already in process as a way for them to be able to appeal that. On the other side of things, when you were talking about the Ag Advisory Committee, which is the Governor's Ag Advisory Committee, they are currently set to review everything the department does in the valuation of agricultural land. And they go through that. We have representatives on there from Montana State University, and that is one of the requirements within that committee. And they have been very active, actually, in even setting up the classification process, et cetera, that we use now. And I think that that would be a good place to use them and expand that, to have them look over the qualifications also for that, as far as AUMs, et cetera. We've had to pay them in the past to do some things on the leasing rates, et cetera. But I think that could be incorporated as part of their duties on that committee, and using someone from the ag college, I think, is really awesome to help with that. Just throwing those two bits out there.
Okay, so that being said, now what? I think we have, and I can't think of the name, what the word for it is, and I should know better. An extenuating circumstances kind of appeal with some things in the Department of Revenue. If you, should you have that for this, which says, you know, I'm a one-off. I've got 79 acres and I dang sure a cowboy, but I don't qualify. I need the ability to go to the Department of Revenue and say, see, this is real cow poop. Should we have something like that there, or should we do it some other way?
Now, would that just exacerbate the need for more FTEs?
Maybe. I don't want more.
I don't want more either.
Good. We're on the same team again. So maybe for the draft, we leave it alone and see what comes of it. That always scares me, but.
This Ross, I was thinking about that, and when we talked about this early on, because we just kind of came off the discussion about what if you've got 40 or 80 acres of dry land farming, and how do you prove that up? But you signed an attestation that you're engaged in farming, and it seems to me that it's fairly easy to tell if somebody's been farming or not. And here again, we're not determining if they're a good farmer or not. We're just looking at it saying they've put there's inputs in it. There's, tillage and chemicals and, there's something going on there that ought to be able to be provable, even if they get a terrible crop and the production isn't there. I think the hardest one to me is the grazing, because it's, it's just sitting out there, and did they graze it or didn't they? And did they graze it at the level they needed to? And I feel like that's there again, it's an attestation saying, yes, we're engaged in grazing as an operation. And if they're one-off, they can't quite meet the criteria because of some reason, it seems to me that's when you have that review that says, no, they're definitely doing this. They're just, they can only run so many cows on this property, but they're doing it. Now, maybe that causes too much of a burden. I don't know, but.
I don't know either. Somebody give me an idea as to how they think we should go forward here.
Well, you're only looking at their income the year that they, when they apply, right? There's not an annual, re-up. Is that right? So don't you have the discretion when they come and prove up they have 1,500 for grazing or 4,000 for other crops? Don't you have the discretion to look at averages that would take into some extenuating circumstances, or apply your extenuating circumstances there when you're analyzing if they meet the annual gross income, to look at more than just the immediately preceding year?
That's a good question for Bonnie to answer, or Bryce, I think, since I don't know the answer.
Well, part of that is the process. Part of it's in this statute already. It talks about extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
We usually will allow like a provisional year for those change of ownership situations to allow that new owner the time to, plant a crop or what have you, and then come back to us and verify their income, that they're still actively engaged in ag production, and verify the income that, it's a property they just purchased. There are different things we currently do. I think it's just from our standpoint, and having to deal with this in other realms too, it's kind of hard to proactively try to guess and put all of these exceptions in place versus, wait and see what kind of things come to us and then reevaluate and build a rule or come back and change the statute after we've had a chance to see what some of those extenuating circumstances are, instead of us sitting here and trying to guess at what those might be and put something in place. That's extremely difficult to do.
So if I'm hearing this right, Bryce figures we've got the extenuating circumstances thing in place. So we may not have to deal with that. Am I paraphrasing you correctly?
I think we have enough in place now to proceed, and then as we start going through this process and actually start getting some of these people coming in with these extenuating circumstances, we would be better suited to evaluate whether what's in place, if that's sufficient enough, or hey, we found these things that we don't quite think fit in with what's currently in statute, that then we could address at that point.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that? I take that's a yes? Or did my computer freeze and I'm talking to myself?
And
I saw Mark
Yes.
move.
Got some
Okay,
hands up.
good. Everybody sat there pretty quiet. All right, so we're sticking with what we have here then, in effect.
Just $4,006 an acre for everything over 640. Leave grazing at 1,500. Address the extenuating circumstances. Everyone's good with that.
You have
At the
two
risk
hands
of
up, Mr.
stating the
Chair.
obvious,
Oh, I
folks.
got, okay, I don't see hands, so you're gonna have to tell me who it is, Bill.
Mr. Story's up first.
Go ahead, Bob.
I'm on a different subject, so I maybe Representative Thane has something to contribute to the current discussion.
Thanks, Bob. I would just jump in and say that I think the reality is if there are significant extenuating circumstances, we'll hear that in testimony when we get to committee hearings. And there's always an amendment process if necessary. But I think it's important for us to have a clear idea of how we want to move the initial draft forward with the understanding that we're going to get some public reaction and that may or may not influence how we proceed.
That's probably the right answer. So I'm good with that. Anybody else? Oh, Bob had something. Sorry, Bob, I forgot about you.
Well, I'm still struggling with this contiguous parcel concept, you know, I mean, there's a lot of properties out there, agricultural operations that have land scattered all over the place, you know, and I still don't quite understand why we're so concerned about parcels have to be contiguous as long as they're in ownership and use by the same entity, you know. I mean, for example, my place, I got, you know, it was originally divided in half between my dad and my uncle, and I got a one, it's a quarter section, it's not a 160 because it's got a county road running diagonally through it, but it's a mile away from all my other land. But it's always been a part of the property, you know, so I don't know. I guess that one I'd have to prove separately that it was agricultural use, which wouldn't be an issue, but I don't know why I have to go through that process.
So can we add, Bob, just on contiguous parcels or those under common owner or contiguous or parcels under common ownership? Does that?
Well, it kind of says that in there already till it gets to the part about contiguous.
Yeah.
I'm looking at A.
So currently those non-contiguous pieces, as long as they're a part of your bona fide operation, they don't have to stand on their own to qualify. It's just if you had, you know, your operation there, Bob, and then you had a 10-acre parcel on Flathead Lake, that parcel wouldn't qualify unless you can somehow demonstrate that it's part of your bona fide operation. So if you like have a 10-acre parcel that abuts, you know, forest land where you do all your grazing in the summer, yeah, you can easily prove that that's part of your bona fide operation and that qualifies already, even if it's not contiguous. So the contiguous piece, I think, more so comes into this idle classification component on the 640 acres and whether you get that idle classification if you say own 20 or however many 20-acre lots across the state that total 640, should you get the idle land classification on, you know, 20-acre lots or 40 20-acre lots that you have scattered all over across the state. So that's kind of, I think, more so where the contiguous piece comes in, is when we're looking at that 640 cutoff in the idle land classification versus like bona fide operations. If those non-contiguous parcels are part of a bona fide operation, they get included as is.
Well, and then that gets back again to say I didn't own that 160, someone else did, and I was renting it and using it as part of my operation. They would have to then prove it was ag land though.
Correct. They'd have to show us the lease payment that you were leasing it from them for $4,000 or more, essentially.
Yeah. Well, again, I was just looking at 15.7.202, the big A down there where the $4,000 in, and then all that contiguous parcels. That again, that's why I just question why that was in there after it kind of explains it doesn't make any difference. We'll let it go and see how it comes out.
I guess that might be the best. We're gonna beat this horse or get on him and ride him, I guess. Should we put this thing in a bill draft and take it to revenue interim? Or is there something else we need to do here?
We have 3 other hands up online.
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Chair.
Bill, you're gonna have to call him. I can't, my computer's not showing anybody here.
Ms. Johnson?
Thanks, Bill. I was just gonna tell Bob not to sweat the small stuff. I farm in 4 different counties.
Okay, now we have Mr. Deno.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions on some language on the very last page under the term conservation. In the second to last line, there's a phrase in there that says such as establishing conservation easements. It seems out of place to me there. It doesn't, there's either a typo in there or I'm just not reading it correctly. But in any event, I'm not sure that we want to be including conservation easements in that definition anyways.
Does somebody have an answer to address that or a comment?
But does it depend on if the conservation easement is for the purpose of preservation or truly ag conservation? And I suppose there is a distinction.
Right, most conservation easements have active grazing going on. At least the ones the state enters into, and most of them I'm familiar with various land trust companies too. What's the troublesome language? I'm sorry, I was distracted and okay.
So the second to last line, it's a very long sentence that starts on the 4th line. But I would suggest just striking it, because whether you've got a conservation easement or not, it's really, are you producing ag production or not? That depends. In some conservation easements you are producing ag products and some you aren't. So I think we just, from a political standpoint, I think including conservation easements in there is going to attract a lot of attention, and I think we're better off leaving those out.
So your recommendation is to delete that second sentence and
Well, just the phrase such as establishing conservation
Okay.
easements.
yeah, I'm fine with that.
I agree. That'd be fine with me. But what does the rest of the committee think?
Makes sense to me.
I'm good with that. Just finish the thought as it begins. Take out, oh yeah, very good. That's exactly what I was going to say.
All right.
So just for clarification, I'm trying to, somehow I missed that part in this. Obviously, this is section 7 for the purposes of this part. Agriculture use does not, this is the first section up there, includes certain activities. So this is pointing out what agriculture does not do, correct? All of these in the red?
Yes.
Right, okay, I was making sure I understood that. So, yeah, so I'm in agreement. The section about conservation easements, if it's specific to maintaining agriculture production, then you're still doing agriculture production. It shouldn't be denied that ag rate. That's what we're all saying here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that was a good catch, because if you start putting that specific language in there, as Mr. Deneau said, it is going to get a whole new cadre of people opposing and supporting different languages. And this is supposed to be an agricultural bill.
Yeah, no, that was a good catch.
I've got one more question on that paragraph, and it's in the first sentence, the very end of the sentence. including commercial production of agricultural goods or the storage or preservation of natural resources that can be extracted. That last part about natural resources that can be extracted, can you give an example of that? Why are we including non-agricultural commercial purposes in this definition?
I think there you go again, more detail than is necessary on an ag bill.
I think that might have something to do with non-productive patented mining claims. Bonnie is the one who taught me everything I know about that, so maybe she could weigh in on that.
Sure, I'll weigh in on it. Non-productive patented mining claims are listed as also a within class 3 property, and they get an ag valuation. So that would just be a portion of that, clarifying that those lands and how they don't fit into this other of the qualified ag. So I think that that's fine.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so where do we, are we all good there with that piece? And that makes sense. Is there anything else we have to address with this bill?
So there's two other questions I wanted to maybe to weigh in on and clarify. So our idle land classification, if it does have a 1 acre, if it has a residence on it, should that 1 acre be valued at market value like it's currently done non-qual? Again, this is assuming a separate from the 1 acre market value bill draft, but just for the purposes of this one and the idle land classification, how should that 1 acre, if there's a residence on those parcels, be treated? Should it be valued at market value or some other standard?
If I'm just going to throw one out, I'd say market value. They're not an ag. They're by definition not an ag. So why is their 1 acre homestead valued as ag homesteads are? And that's just to start the conversation. I could be convinced either way.
I agree with you, Brendan. I kind of assumed it would be market value.
That keeps it consistent.
Anybody else?
I guess I'm kind of confused about what he's asking. I have to go back and look at my draft. Class 4 property includes all improvements on land that is eligible for valuation, assessment, and taxation as agricultural land.
So this is what is currently in statute for the non-qual. This is what makes it a non-qual classification. That 1 acre site is currently at market value. So I just wanted information that we would want that same process to occur for this idle land classification for the 640 and above that don't qualify as that.
Okay.
Everyone's good with that. Leave that market. And the last thing that was discussed in the prior meetings that kind of came up a bit earlier is, do we stick with the current practice of once you're qualified forever, or do we want to move forward with the reapplication process? And that's where this section comes in. So for the purposes of this section, the department shall administer a program for the periodic review of property receiving agricultural classification. The department may request a new application be provided to determine whether the property is still actively devoted to an agricultural use. The department must provide notice to the property owner that a new application is due. Failure to reapply in the time frame prescribed may be cured by providing an application within 30 days of receipt of the property owner's notice of classification and appraisal. So essentially, we would come up with our process, whether it's as simple as, every couple years, however we would decide that would be done through administrative rule, how we would administer that reapplication process. It would probably, I'm anticipating we would send notification to those taxpayers sometime in the fall, give them until early January, February to reapply. If they didn't reapply, we would change their classification back to tract 4, and then they would receive an assessment notice that year in June, typically notifying them that, you know, hey, here's your property. It's been reclassified as class 4. And if they applied within that 30-day window from when they received the notice, they could still get put back into the ag classification, is essentially kind of the process, how I envisioned it working. But it would be fleshed out in an administrative role, because I don't know that we can put that entire process into statute.
Miss Johnson has her hand up.
Go ahead, Cindy.
So, Bryce, does the periodic review, or, I mean, is there a time frame that the Department of Revenue is going to address? What would precipitate that other than a change in property? And if it's going to be periodic, do we need to define it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the item up for discussion, is we would put this process into place in administrative rule, so it would go through public comment there, but you know, we would definitely model that rule off of input from this working group, whether that a simple, hey, each year you just say, yes, I'm still in active ag, should that be every 3 years? We would then, just from probably the administration standpoint, and again, FTE, we would have some sort of staggered process to accomplish that. I don't think we would be having everyone re-up at the same time. We would, you know, try to stagger that and spread that workload and lessen that workload over a number of years. But I know it's been discussed in prior meetings that the group doesn't necessarily think it's once you're in, kind of like it is currently, that there should have to be some sort of process in place for reaffirming that you're still actively devoted to an agricultural use.
And that process would include when property changes hands.
Yes, I mean, that is currently the practice, and I would imagine remain the practice, that whenever property changes ownerships, that new owner has to show that they're still in ag productions.
Mr. Story has his hand up.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I think you need a periodic review. It doesn't have to be complicated, just another affirmation that you're still there and still doing ag. You know, if the department wants to set up an audit process and audit some small number of them every once in a while, that'd be another issue, but just you need to do it on a even number year basis, you know, so that you get it done before the appraisals come out. So, you know, every 6 years or 8 years or no longer than that, I would go. I mean, it's kind of like what they're proposing to do with the tax exempt property, right? They're trying to get them on an 8-year cycle of reapplying, or at least doing something so that people know they're still out there. So that would be my suggestion, to have something in probably in statute that, you know, you have to certify that you're still in ag production every 6 or 8 years.
That seems to make sense, right?
Mr. Campbell has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know, I just don't want to make things more complicated, but something that seems to work for the cherry farmers when we do our food safety audits is we have unannounced audits. and keeps people on their toes. Because if, I don't know, maybe this isn't true, maybe this doesn't hold true, but if they knew it was just every 3 or 4 years, they could be lax for 3 years and then, you know, actually look like a farmer on the 4th year. So, but, and then, yeah, I mean, it would have to be periodic, but if they signed up to be an ag status, if they were known that they were subject to unannounced audits anytime, then maybe that would work. Just a thought.
Well, I think that's somewhat of a good idea, but as long as there's some place in the statute that says, you know, you make a false claim and you're not doing what you said you were doing, subject to penalties. I think we talked about that earlier on some other process where the penalties were pretty severe, multiples of taxes, or you got to go back to paying full market or pay the idle land tax if you're not compliant and can't prove that you've been in continuous production, barring a natural disaster. You know, maybe those are some things to think about working in here at some point in time as amendments, but by and large, most people are going to, you know, are already in ag. They've been in ag for a long time. They're not going to be a problem. And the few that are, you know, if you have stiff enough penalties, that'll solve that problem pretty rapidly too.
Sounds good. So I get, sorry, as long as I have the floor, I was planning on the meeting wrapping up at about 5. So I was just gonna kind of make some parting comments and wanted to get the legislators' opinion on this too, but I just was gonna reiterate, I just kind of feel like if we're making this tax policy change is so complicated that it's going to be less likely to get anything done. And I'm just kind of feeling, like I stated before, that like the minimum production value, maybe we should just leave that well enough alone and try to concentrate on some of the concrete changes that are less likely to for people to be able to fraudulently get around, because like I was saying, I think with this the minimum, you know, gross income requirements, I mean, it's really, I mean, we can beat that to death and it's really not going to make much difference in a lot of cases. I mean, like you were saying, a person could just sell 1 cow and there's his check for $1,500 or $4,000 or whatever. So, and then, I mean, even with the idea of having the idle land too, I mean, some of these things are just kind of getting so complicated. I think the idea of the other ideas that we put together of the homestead property being appraised, assessed at market value, and getting rid of the non-qual are, I mean, if we could just stick with those 2 really concrete ideas like that. Oh, and that 640 is no longer automatic ag status. Those things seem really straightforward, and I think they'd work a lot better as far as, you know, not being able to have loopholes and beat the system with those ideas. So sorry, I just wanted to make those points. I mean, for me, I know I've been beating to death about my situation up here with the cherry farmers, but I think that that's it's something it's not going away and it's getting worse. I mean, more and more people are realizing it. They're catching on to the idea that they can do this, and it's the residents that see it happening are getting more and more bitter. And the thing is, it's not just an isolated case. I mean, I think that's something that we should address because it could happen throughout the state, anywhere where you have really high property values, like in the Gallatin Valley, and around Big Sky and Bozeman, and where lots of places where they're really getting escalated property values, people can just become overnight farmers. And I think it would be good to nip that in the bud. And the way to do it is with that homestead market value idea that we had. Okay, I've said enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian.
Sorry,
Go.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Thane has his hand up.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. Since the initial comment by Brian was addressed to legislators, I would just respond by saying I think a good test audience will be the Revenue Interim Committee. We'll bring these proposals next week in front of the committee. It'll be the first time most members of the committee have heard them, and I think we'll get good vetting from that committee and potential reaction. I think you're right. There are a lot of moving parts here, but I think another strategy would be that we'll have to be thoughtful and rather intentional about the sequence in which these bills are introduced and presented so that we don't run the risk of setting us off on the wrong foot as we move forward. I don't know if Senator Beard is in agreement with that approach, but I do think that the opportunity for Revenue Interim Committee to hear the presentation next week will be instructive.
I agree, it will be, and I will certainly hope that our Department of Revenue staff is on hand to at least start getting the questions and the ball moving in the right direction so we can go ahead and take it from there. So thank you, Representative Thane.
Thank you both, and we'll have all of the whiz kids there to do their magic for the committee.
Mr. Lewis has his hand up.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'd just say, we've worked on this 6 months, and I'd say at this point, we're not going to make any significant changes that matter. I'd just kind of recommend we send what we have, and I guess like Representative Thane says, let the interim committee hash it out and go from there. So
I think we're all tired of this, ready to do it. Should anybody have a problem with the department getting this bill draft put into a bill draft form and presented as part of the package to Revenue Interim Committee? And maybe we stick the RTC bill in with this one so it makes one less bill, or should we have them separate? Actually, let me just make the motion to everybody what I said, how I said it the first time. Get this thing finalized and put the RTC bill in it. Would anybody agree or disagree?
Well, Cindy has her hand up.
Are you going to disagree with me, Cindy?
Absolutely not. What I
Okay.
wondered was, at what point can I share this with my constituency so I can start building the army that you're going to need?
Would it be okay with everybody if this thing hit the public eye with Revenue Interim Committee? Then it's not trickling out in various draft forms.
I'm glad you asked that, Cindy, because I've got a group over here too that they'll want to be hearing back about any potential changes.
Okay, I'm willing. And what day do they meet? A week from today?
I think that's right. It's the last week of June, isn't it?
Yep, 24th is the.
So yeah, and
Okay.
I'm just thinking out loud that way when this goes out, it's in the form that we all said was the form, instead of, well, that's the draft I had kind of thing, right? I've been around here too long. So
Okay, thank you.
if we do that, then we're all on the same page. That's all the gray hair, isn't it?
That sounds good. Gives us a date to work from too.
Well, we'll get this over to Megan, get it going. Do we have anything else we need to discuss before I tell everybody how much I appreciate and enjoyed the work with all of you guys?
Mr. Story has his hand up.
Sure, Bob.
Yeah, I just wondering, so if you send it over to Megan, is she gonna put it on the website? So, I mean, if the only people show up at the committee are us, if nobody else knows that thinks it's not a good idea and doesn't show up at the committee, I guess that's to our benefit, but I don't know if that's good for the committee, but anyway, I don't know. She's already sent a lot of her stuff out. She could post it online, I guess, and if people are interested, they'll find it. I haven't looked at the agenda. I guess we're on the agenda, so.
It's on the agenda. We just don't have any documents. She did note that she will be putting up additional documents as they're made available. But I think that if she's got draft all over these, nobody should get.
Thank you, Senator.
And I think once we get this last draft, the other three have already been posted on our website. Once we get this final one, we'll post it to this working group's webpage as well, and Bill will send those out to the interested party lists that he has for these meetings. So it should get out at least a couple days, hopefully, before that meeting occurs.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, we do have a gentleman, Mr. Atkins, who would like to make public comment, probably.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, in all this discussion, I'll just throw out an example that you haven't talked about and thought about, and I think there are a lot of examples where people might have 100 acres, they might have 200 acres, and a big chunk of it is class 10 forest land, and then they've got some of it may be fairly thin soiled grazing land, and they aren't going to meet the criteria you've established. And so say you got 100 acres, 60 of it's forested, 40 acres of it is currently non-qualified ag. Now they're not going to qualify, so that's going to become class 4. I think that's going to be a problem. You're going to hear about that. That's enough.
When you said that's enough, does that mean you are you done?
That I just wanted to make sure that you were thinking about this. I don't need to beat this dead horse. You guys have had enough of this meeting today. I just want you to think about a lot of lands out there that are going to go to class 4 that could be just a thin soiled ridge that's steep, that's currently non-qualified ag, and now it's going to become class 4. And what's that going to do to people's taxes?
And you raise very good points, Mr. Atkins. Thank you. And that's the thing we've been wrestling with this whole time, right? And
right.
It comes down to what was ag classification rate for? And
yeah,
was
I mean,
it for ridges that weren't for ag? At one point, the legislature thought it was, or treated it as such.
Right.
The question, and that's what we've been wrestling with here, is how should we treat that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm president of the Montana Forest Owners Association. We've got folks that have 80 acres and 60 of it's forested, and then they've got 20 acres that a neighbor hays. Are they going to be able to meet the threshold? I guess I just raising the issue of these inclusions that are going to be problematic.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's just I haven't heard you talk about this set of situations that are common.
Well, I would, and I'm sure the members of the committee would very much appreciate having you, when we have this bill draft at revenue interim next week, raising that, and hopefully, if you would please bring suggestions on how to deal with. I mean, no, this committee isn't exclusive, the only smart kids in the school. We're trying to build the right thing here, and your input with your group is vitally important. So if you read the bill and you've got thoughts, please bring them. Nobody here has pride of authorship in this thing. What we're looking for is trying to do this right.
Well, I or one of my board members will be there.
We very much appreciate it. We appreciate the more input we have, maybe the better the product we get, right?
You bet.
So thank you. Anything else from anybody?
Can I ask a question regarding that? So
You mean of Mr. Atkins? Go ahead.
yes. Okay, so I guess I'm not real familiar with how class 10 ag well, and it's not class 10 class 10 classification works. But I mean, if the whole property, even though some of it wasn't in grazing, if the whole property qualified, I mean, couldn't the whole property just qualify as class 10 just because there's enough forest land on it, productive forest land to say the whole property is class 10. It's just like, I mean, whenever you have one of these pieces of ag property that's mixed ag, the whole property is considered ag, even though part of it might be just grazing and part of it might be irrigated and part of it might be something else. I mean, couldn't you just classify the whole 100 acre as class 10? No.
That's not the way it works now.
I think Bonnie'd like to say something on that if you just say it, so we'd get it over.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
So forest classification is a whole different beast than the agricultural. There's no application required for classification. And in statute, there's like 7 different criteria, and they're all interrelated together for that portion of the land that has forest. And it's land that it has to be capable of growing commercial timber at a rate that is considered commercially saleable and harvestable. So then whatever portion is not growing the timber gets classified according to what that land has. So right now, some of it is class 4. Some of it does fall under non-qual and some of it is agricultural. So forest comes in as a combination with any of those others. So it would take a lot of changes to change that around for that remainder acreage on forest parcels. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so it is different. I see.
The only other thing I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, was that for Mr. Atkins' benefit, is the revenue committee is a Zoom meet. You can Zoom that, so you don't have to show up. You just have to log in, I think, by the end of the week so that you get the link. But the chairman could clarify that.
Who do you log in with?
Megan Moore, I believe.
Yeah, it's right off
If
the
you go to
website.
the website and look at Revenue Interim Committee, if you go to the legislative website, then there's a link there for you to sign up.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody. Is there anything more anybody wants to address?
You have a question still, Mr. Story? Not seeing anything online.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody. This is far from over, but this is at least maybe the last of our meetings for a little while. can't thank you enough and how impressed I have been. And I know the Lieutenant Governor's expressed it to me a couple of times when she's been in person about how impressive the individuals on this committee were and the amount of effort and the quality of the work that was produced. So I want to thank you all. I thoroughly enjoyed it thus far. And I can't tell you that's the same with everything I have to do at my job. So I really appreciate it. We can hang this thing up unless anybody has anything else to say.
I'd like to just say a special thanks to the staff. Your staff has been wonderful and very resourceful, shepherded us throughout the way. So now we move on to the next phase, and that is getting bills introduced. So thank you.
Thank you all. And yes, I'm awfully humbled to work with the quality of the staff that work with me here at Revenue. Those guys are awesome. So, all right, we'll talk to everyone soon. Keep an eye on your emails, and we'll keep in touch.
Okay, thank you, Director. Great job.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.